Alright, 20 movies to catch up on from this year. Can we do this in record time? Good God, I really hope so. So these are from all over and come from all different sources. Some of them were in theaters, some of them were straight from Netflix, some of them were on VOD. Some of these I saw maybe just last week, some maybe a month ago, some maybe several months ago. So hopefully my memory's not too vague on some of these, but like I said, hopefully we'll just do this as like kind of a speed round thing. That's what I'm hoping for. But usually when I plan for that, it goes a little long, so hopefully that doesn't happen. So why don't we put that to rest by starting right now. I think the first one I want to start with is Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil, and Vile. The Ted Bundy, Zac Efron movie that we heard about for a really long time, and then when it actually came out, it came out and people talked about it, and then it just kind of seemed to go on its way, and to me anyway, disappear pretty quickly. And the quality, in my opinion, pretty much about matches that. Because we do have Efron here as the lead, which at first might seem like maybe a bit of stunt casting, which I can get, especially when you go with somebody that, like, much like Bundy himself, that, say, younger girls would flock to and see as some sort of, like, heartthrob idol of sorts. There's even that disturbing scene in the movie where we see one of his followers outside the prison, and she says something in an interview like, yeah, I mean, I guess I love him, and stuff like that. So it captures that stuff nicely, but it does also, I mean, it's not, it doesn't feel entirely like stunt casting, because you can tell that Efron kind of really went into this really wanting to get it right, and there's plenty of things that do work, like the arrogance in particular kind of comes through when I think he says something on the lines of, I'm more popular than Disney World, but he's also got to have the charming vibe, because a lot of this movie, which I wasn't expecting, is basically a romance movie with Lily Collins, one of my favorite actresses in the world. But she's fine. She's fine here. She really is, and she gets a lot of showy scenes. That really does take a particular talent to pull off. But a lot of it comes down to how the movie's made in general. And one of the things I know people tend to... Some people criticize, but I think most people found it relatively admirable, that the idea was, how exploitive was this movie going to be, should it go that route? So there was the whole glorifying him thing aside, there was also the how gory is it going to be. And the movie decides to really almost not be at all. Where they don't really show any gore and they don't show any of the murders. We really just see vague aftermath, and pretty vague. So there is something to that that's kind of a refreshing way to look at material like this. That there's also how it feels all over the place because of the way the timeline is set up, where the timeline is all over the damn place, where we're getting flashbacks and flash forwards, and we're jumping ahead in decades, and there's one continuous timeline that's going here, but even it's also jumping forward really fast, and you can never quite tell where we are in time until there's something that, like, reminds you within the scene. So that can be really off-putting, but in regards to off-putting, obviously the main thing that comes to mind is, are they glorifying him or not, or does it feel like that? And it is one of those cases where, like, the scenes we get with Lily Collins, like in the entire first half, almost feel like maybe they're a bit too romantic, even though we kind of get a sense of what they're setting up with it and why the scenes are played up like this. Really just all for the payoff of, like, the last 30 seconds or so, like right there at the very end. But it's a lot of time that we spend in these scenes, and because you would think, and even if it does feel like maybe it'd be beating you over the head, you would think there would still have, like, they'd put like an underlying feel of, like, evil in these scenes. But no, if you don't know the context, like if you were to just watch this blind and take all of the context out of it, like just these scenes, you would think it's any other romance movie, which is kind of odd. So I thought, like, the direction could have maybe done something a little, even something, like, really subtle. They could have done something like that, and maybe some people might think that's in there, but I didn't really see anything like it. And maybe that possibly could be they wanted us, like, it's almost like the scenes between the two of them we're seeing from her perspective. given that we do see the way we get to see the scenes again at the end when everything is revealed makes sense. But like I say, you really should almost like get a feel of that in a really subtle way as they're going on. But it's almost like it's saving itself for the final payoff. So, which we all know anyway because it's history that we're all aware of. So I don't know what they would be hiding anyway. But then there's also the thing that the more I thought about it, the more it didn't quite sit right with me, was, you'll notice before this movie was released by Netflix, that we almost kind of saw, like, a rise again in that whole glorifying Bundy thing, where they had the actual documentaries on Netflix, and people were watching them and, like, tweeting out, it's like, is it disturbing that I think he's actually kind of hot, or something like that? And it almost feels like this weird sort of cash grab, that they would put out those documentaries and get that reaction, and it's like, oh, how convenient, they're also the ones releasing this movie. So that could maybe feel a bit off-putting, but yeah, but still they do find ways to where it's not near as, like, off-putting in that sense that it could have been, or that you might think it is going in. Especially with, I think the whole not zoning in on the graphic detail of the murders and having that on screen, I think kind of is a more or less balances it as well as they can in that regard, so there is that. And there are standout scenes here and there, the whole confession thing. There was one moment that kind of stood out to me in an interesting way, where it was, when they're talking about the fact that this is, like, the first trial that was, like, put out in the public, and, like, actually be able to view by everybody, like, in real time. And the fact that and this is obviously, pure coincidence, but it's just something that struck me. The prosecutor, played by Jim Parsons, whose name is Simpson, and it's like, at one point, Malkovich calls him Mr. Simpson, and I thought it was this weirdly prophetic thing to see this murder case that was famously being viewed by everybody, and following it in real time, and just hearing the name Mr. Simpson dropped. It was just, it was jarring how, like, almost prophetic it felt. But that's just obviously a coincidence. But, yeah, so when you look at it from that sense, and thinking about, is it exploiting it too much, is it glorifying him and all that, interestingly enough, the way they sort of played up what I was talking about, where it's like, they make all those romantic scenes seem normally romantic, and then it's like basically all waiting for the payoff, and then it's like they shy away from certain things, and it's like, obviously a part of me is, saying it's admirable that they don't shove some things in your face. Like, I like the idea. I don't think we need the gore. I think the movie showed that pretty well, that we don't need the gore. But with just some of the way they handled, the way they portray him in general, it almost feels like maybe it's too safe sometimes. And where it's like, oh, well, we want a little of this, but if we do a little of this, maybe that's enough of an even balance. Maybe. It didn't seem quite sure of itself. Like, the movie doesn't feel particularly confident in its portrayal all the time. So, yeah, but I mean, overall, the performances really do elevate it a lot, and Efron is really... I don't know that Efron is as, like, great and memorable as he could have been, and as much as, like, the role allows, but I do think that it's... there is something here that's worth watching, even if it's not necessarily going to be one of the great movies of this particular genre, where we do, like, this look at true crime and all that. So, yeah, like, it's not going to be like a Zodiac or a Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer or anything like that. But it's fine for what it is. But like I said, I think it pretty much fits the whole thing of, it was out and it was talked about for a while, but then it just kind of went away, and I don't really hear about it anymore, so that makes sense to me. So, let's go on to Always Be My Maybe, another really hyped up Netflix movie. And yeah, I did kind of go into this one a bit cynically, because it was like, because you see enough of these made for Netflix movies, and you get burned enough, your expectations get really, really damn low. So when this movie comes out and everybody starts building it up and raving about it and going on, and it becomes so popular, my immediate thought is, so this is just another overhyped Netflix romantic comedy, right? Like, like there's no, like, it's, but going into it, there is something about the two leads, Randall Park and Ali Wong. Randall Park, who I've especially said good things about in the past before, still really does work as a romantic lead, and of course she is perfect alongside him, and they go well together. Even if the setup is a bit cliche, where it kind of sets up like, oh, they love each other, but they also kind of can't stand each other. Where will this go, and all that? And then they find themselves reunited. And will it happen, or will they not, or will the people that they're with? All that stuff. There's really nothing new here as far as that goes. But there are enough refreshing directions that it goes in regards to like their chemistry together and some of the jokes that it comes up with. Add a sort of refreshing feel. There are moments still where, especially at the beginning, after a relatively awkward sex scene, they play up the whole. This is one of those movies that's trying really hard, trying too hard, to be like relatable in its realism and like playing up the awkwardness of it, like when they go to a fast food place, but everything's awkward now, so it's like he's not sure where he should put his arm on her and stuff like that. And like I get why that's there, but at the same time it's like it's choreographed awkwardness. Like the whole point is that it feels like natural and it's like, oh, I've been there or whatever. But it doesn't, like, it feels way too choreographed, and that's the way a lot of the awkwardness is in this movie. There's also because they do that a lot for the humor, and a lot of the times it doesn't land. Particularly, there's a character played by Casey Wilson that I think it's Ali Wong works with. And she's that character that's just basically there in every single scene. She might as well just be screaming, "Hey, I'm so awkward." And that's really grating really fast. And so sometimes it relies on that kind of shit too much. And that so rarely works in itself. But you take a character like that out of the equation, there's still plenty of likable side characters. His dad, in particular. His dad might be, like, one of the most likable movie dads that we've seen in, like, a really long time. So that was really nice to see. And then, of course, one of the things that got this movie's reputation out there was the whole Keanu Reeves thing. Which seemed really damn random when I heard about it. I kind of wonder how I would have felt if I didn't know about that going in. And it hadn't been, by the time I watched this, it had become like a whole thing. Because you know, I love Keanu Reeves as much as the next guy. I was one of the first people out there like praising the first John Wick and saying, you know, you need to go see that shit. It's not just another Keanu movie. Yeah, this whole Keanu fixation on like online and stuff like that is really getting weird and out of hand, and this was really fueling that fire. But still, what I liked about these scenes is not only are they hilarious, and not only is it great to see an actor like Keanu Reeves playing so much against type, doing the "this is the end" thing, playing the exaggerated version of himself that's like totally not him at all. But the fact that this actually moves the plot. Like, it's not necessarily just some celebrity cameo gimmick that they throw in. He, like, has an actual part, has to do an actual performance, and be really funny. And that's, like, what a big portion of, like, the middle of the movie is, and, like, kind of the central conflict becomes. Because at first I was really afraid it was going to overstay its welcome, but when I realized it was going to actually be a plot point, it was like, oh, okay, this makes sense now. So yeah, and it makes you stay for the end credits with Randall Park putting out what is essentially, I guess, a Keanu Reeves diss track, I guess you could call it, which is really funny. So, but despite all this, it does still find a way to find its way back to the cliches. Like, there's the moment where he eventually hits rock bottom, and then suddenly the movie just really picks up the pieces really quickly in montage. Like, just this montage of miracles in his life happen, like, all at once in 10 seconds. After we spent the whole movie getting him to rock bottom so he could climb his way out. Solved in, like, 10 seconds of montage. And some of that is explained, but some of it also is bullshit to get the movie to the end. So there is that. And a lot of the time, like, a lot of the movie hinges on them having convoluted fights. the central fight at the very beginning that sets the whole plot off, because they go from inseparable their whole lives to one fight that makes them split up for however many years it was, like a decade or something, or even more than that. I don't remember, but and that's what drives the movie so much, is these convoluted fights. And once again, you can say that's part of the realism, because oftentimes, you know, especially when people love each other, the fights they have are going to be really convoluted and really pointless. But at the same time, it's kind of the thing I talked about when I talked about the 5-year engagement, where it's like, you can give them really convoluted fights and make them always doing that, and there's something that can feel real and relatable to that. But at the same time, when does it stop seeming like, oh, I've been there, and becomes more like, you're stranded at a friend's house who's in a relationship, and you're awkwardly having to sit on the couch while they fight, and all you want to do is walk out the door? Like, when does it become that? And this movie kind of treads that line a little bit, so there is that. But regardless, the characters are so likable enough, and Park and Wong are so likable, that it does eventually win you over, despite the reservations you may have in regards to the cliches of the genre. So like, even if it's begrudgingly, the happy ending will like win you over. So as long as they accomplish that, then they're obviously doing something right. Even if sometimes those cliches may overpower the more kind of fresh additions they have on this, there's still something, and they're worthwhile for sure. So once again, probably overhyped, most definitely overhyped, but for some reason, romantic comedies on Netflix do that now. So if that's a new thing, then good for them. But I guess it's still not my thing. So, but this one's fine. This one's fine. So there is that. The next movie I want to talk about is The Intruder. This was a movie I can't remember why I didn't see it right away when it was in theaters, because this is a movie that I genuinely had interest in, because I've talked about this before. This is the kind of guilty pleasure movie that I just eat up. Especially when you have an actor of like Dennis Quaid's caliber in the bad guy part. And the thing about this, though, is that these movies are so rarely genuinely good. Like, we used to have, like in the, you know, Fatal Attraction era, or in the 90s when we had stuff like Fear. With movies like this, back when they were genuinely good, seems to be a time that is past. Long past. So, going into this with that kind of attitude, I have to say, this movie was everything I hoped it would be. And I sincerely mean that. Because, for starters, it was really interesting given the casting. Because you've got Megan Good as the wife, but the guys here are Michael Ealy and Dennis Quaid. And the interesting thing about the casting of them is that it's like a reverse of two parts that these guys have played before in movies just like this. Where we had The Perfect Guy, where Michael Ealy was the crazy one, the stalker that kind of walked around the house and watched the girl shower and all that, and was the one that they had to confront at the end in the house. And then the first thing you may have noticed was that Dennis Quaid was in a movie from like 2003 with Sharon Stone and Stephen Dorff and Kristen Stewart called Cold Creek Manor, which is pretty much exactly this movie. Like, this movie almost feels like a loose remake. But interestingly enough, Dennis Quaid was playing the Michael Ealy part of that movie. So this is, like, I don't know if that's intentional or what the hell, but, yeah, so that's just another layer of what even the hell is this, that I kind of just appreciate about it in general. So if there's one thing that, like, because you talk about, like, if I enjoyed this movie as much as I did, what is it that makes it not a good movie? Well, there's a few things. For starters, there's just cliches abound everywhere, that they don't do anything to particularly elevate. But one thing that really stood out was the fact that we are going to have to root for them against Dennis Quaid. And the thing about it is that the Michael Ealy character is pretty much instantly a douchebag. And it's not one of those cases where he, like, has to go through this and, like, change his ways. No, he's like a douchebag throughout it. Like, he doesn't really seem to change much. He's just always a douchebag all the time. Because you've got, when they first are getting to know Quaid, when Quaid is pre-crazy. Now, of course, in retrospect, we realize, yeah, he's kind of in the right because Dennis Quaid's crazy, but I mean, in the moment, they don't know that. And he's still just being an all-around, you know, asshole. So there's that. And then they go out for ice cream, and just pretty much right in front of her, he's being, like, outwardly flirty with the ice cream girl. And then he has the nerve to deny it later, even though she was watching it with her very own eyes. And then if that's not enough, it's strongly implied that he pretty much cheated on her in the past. So it's like, how far down the douche river is this guy gonna go? But nevertheless, these are the people that we're going to have to root for when Dennis Quaid goes full-on crazy, which is what we're waiting for anyway. So it's like, by the time Dennis Quaid reaches full-on crazy, it's so amazing, you're almost rooting for him. Which you really shouldn't be doing. But that's just what he accomplishes here. But like I said, there's the whole cliches, there's the best friend that's gonna find out too much and ultimately get killed. There's going to be the horror cliche jump scares for no reason whatsoever. I swear to God, there is a moment where Michael Ealy is walking through the dark house by himself in the middle of the night, and Megan Good comes out and just says, "Honey," to get his attention, and it makes him jump. And I swear to God, just her saying "honey" makes the score literally sound like a bull in a china shop. So it's that kind of movie a lot of the time also. And then there's this whole superfluous thing where, there's this mystery surrounding it. It kind of felt like the original Friday the 13th, where, Michael Ealy is being pursued by this truck that's trying to kill him. Like, it stalks him around, it just parks in the dark and stares at him, and tries to run him off the road at some point. Like what happened to Missy Pyle and Ma, is basically what's going on here. And for some reason, we never see Dennis Quaid in this truck. And it's like they're trying to hide it. And it's like Michael Lee looks up and he sees like a silhouette, you know, that may or may not be somebody in this truck. And it's like, it's never even flat out revealed that it's Dennis Quaid. It's just obviously, it's just so obvious that that's what it is. But for some reason they try to build up like this mystery. But obviously what makes this movie as entertaining as it is when Dennis Quaid gets to go full-on crazy. And it's worth the wait. It's absolutely worth the wait. I saw a comment going in, I can't remember from where, but the comment was, I feel like Dennis Quaid was the only person that knew this was a comedy when they were making it. And I can see that. He is going to fucking town on this role, and I love it. There's just pretty much any scene that he's in. There's one particular scene when he's like sitting on his bed after everything's kind of gone down, and we're starting to get a sense now that he's really fucking crazy. So he's looking in a mirror, and he's like practicing trying to smile like a normal person. It's like, just scenes like that are amazing. And then there's stuff like, there's a moment when he's on... Michael Ealy's trying to get a Christmas tree off the roof of his car that's tied down. And Quaid's like, "Here, why don't you use my knife?" And he opens the knife, and he's like waving it in his face, rather than handing it to him from, say, the other side. Where it's like they're not even hiding it, because they know we know. And then by the end, when the final confrontation comes, he's just completely total, full-on animalistic. Like, he's doing the crazy eyes. I think he literally roars at one point. And it's like, this, honestly, is what I came here for. Like, I talk about movies like this not being genuinely good, and the performances, you know, being so over the top that they're amazing. But, I mean, he's experienced enough, and he's talented enough of an actor, that camp had to be the intent here. There is no way he didn't know exactly what the hell he was doing when he was doing this part. So with that in mind, yes, I would go as far as to say, if he went in knowing the camp level he was going to go for, this is a genuinely good performance, because he just goes completely and totally all out and elevates the movie so high that I want to see this movie again. Like that's like that's how amazingly over the top he goes. So yeah. But let's be realistic. It's not a great movie by any means. But to me, and somebody who eats this genre up anyway, I felt it was worth watching. So maybe that's just me though. So let's go on to Little. The movie where Regina Hall gets a curse put on her because she had like this traumatic childhood where everybody made fun of her, so she grows up to be, you know, the evil boss lady. And then a curse is put on her by a random girl doing random magic tricks with a random toy wand. And lo and behold, one of these, suddenly magic exists for this one occasion in the entire world. And Regina Hall wakes up that little girl again. Now, and this was being put out there. They were basically using it as a gimmick. That the actress that plays the little girl, who's like 13 or something, was the idea that it was her pitch, is how this movie got made. And she's like apparently like the youngest credited executive producer ever or something because of that. Now I would have to be a piece of shit to try to take away from a great accomplishment of a child. But with that said, it does feel incredibly gimmicky to try to sell the movie on that, when this concept is not exactly brand new, you know? There's obviously 13 Going on 30, there's a lot of Freaky Friday you could throw into it. Big is the obvious example. It's just sort of like a somewhat reverse thing, where it's like the same movie with the same concept, only it's the adult personality in the small body. So yeah, Freaky Friday, just without the body switching, without there being another person involved. And yeah, and then the whole thing of how it's just unexplained magic from this girl's toy wand. It's like, whatever. Okay, so then the movie goes in all the predictable places you would expect. It's weird because the little girl has all these guys around that are scantily clad because they're the people that she knew when she was an adult. There's a scene where she gets drunk and she's a drunk child. Hilarious. Somehow in public with nobody getting arrested, but that's beside the point. And then, of course, the person looking after her is what is she, like her assistant or something, played by Issa Rae. And the problem with Ray's character here is that we have this concept where Ray's basically the tortured assistant that gets to take over and basically get to be in charge of her because she has to pretend to be her guardian. Otherwise, once again, people will be going to jail. So the thing here is that Ray is basically, you have this whole concept, and Ray is saddled with one joke throughout the entire movie, and that is that she is single. Like, every single joke she has in the movie is her meeting some scantily clad guy that was in Regina Hall's life, and because Regina Hall's not around, only as a little girl, she goes up to the dudes and is like, oh, hey, I'm, like, totally available, just so you know, and that's it. That one joke happens, like, 3 times throughout the movie, with 3 different dudes. Like, every time a new dude is introduced, that joke must be made. So, that's basically all she has to do here. Anne makes a lot of jokes here that don't particularly land. There's one particular joke that... Well, here, the joke is that she wakes up and she calls her and she's like, oh, you won't believe what happened. I woke up and I'm like 13. And then Issa Rae's response is, oh, that wouldn't happen. That only happens to white people, or that's white people shit, or something. And it's not necessarily, I think, that joke is offensive or anything. I just don't get what the joke is. But yeah, we won't go down that rabbit hole, but I'll just say, I don't get what that joke is. That's all I'm saying. And that's kind of what a lot of the jokes are. Not, like, necessarily, like, race-related, but just... They just happen, and you're like, I guess that's a joke, and then it just kind of keeps going, and there's really kind of no laughs in this comedy. And then, after a while, you start to realize that once you're already kind of, like, it's on your bad side, then you kind of start to notice how almost kind of poorly put together it feels. Like everything kind of feels sort of rushed in places for no reason. Like they have to build up the Spirit Day thing, because obviously that's going to be our big climax. So the way they build this up is so incredibly natural. They go into the classroom. They introduce her as the new student. She sits down. There's this antagonizing girl there. And then seemingly right in the middle of class, this girl who is, I guess, in charge of Spirit Day in some way or another, just stands up in the middle of the class and explains Spirit Day to them as if they wouldn't already know. They're telling the audience and they're telling her is what they're doing. And it's like, shouldn't there be a class being taught here? But whatever the hell. And then there's just stuff like the scene at the end, when she's back to her normal self, and it's like, oh, we need the joke that her friends won't recognize her because they don't. She recognizes them, but they won't recognize her because she's an adult now. To do this joke is right before the end credits, and the kids just materialize in a place they would never be otherwise, just to run into her. Like, they're all just happen to be walking around in a group in a place you would have no idea why they were there, just so they can run into her and she can say, oh, you guys! Oh, yeah, I forgot. I don't know you guys. End credits. So that's... And yeah, and when they're not doing that shit to make it look like it's really hastily and poorly put together, there's a whole lot of filler with, you guessed it, dancing and singing. Just anywhere they can put it. And of course that's what the whole climax is, the whole Spirit Day thing, is this competition of sorts. Because that's always a winning climax that's so incredibly exciting. So yeah, and then, but at the same time, with all that frustrating stuff, and the fact that there are 0 laughs in it, I can't remember a single, even pity laugh. Not one. The thing is that watching it, I didn't feel like the movie was awful. Like, I wasn't hating it until about the time Spirit Day came around. And then it was like, good God, murder me. But leading up to that, though, I didn't feel like it was awful, but I was acknowledging that there was no laughs to be found whatsoever. So it's like, it was kind of hard to gauge exactly how you describe it, but then it's like, in a comedy, if a comedy has no laughs in it whatsoever, what do you call it if not bad? So, like, it's really failing at just about everything it's trying, and the story is not original by any means, and has no original jokes to go with it. So, what the hell is everybody doing here? Basically marketing the gimmick that a 13-year-old can pitch a screenplay if they're on a TV show that's popular. That's all. That's all this fucking movie is. The end. So now let's go on to the best of enemies, yes. The new racially charged drama with Taraji and Sam Rockwell. So we can finally see Academy Award winner Sam Rockwell on a poster. And you know what? Speaking of him winning his Oscar, yep, he's playing a racist again. really, really stretching it after that Oscar win. Well, he's got the Fosse thing, so he's fine. So yeah, this is the true story of the whole... There was a whole thing about integration because this all-black school burned down, and the fight was coming between this woman who is constantly speaking out about civil rights, and wouldn't you know it, the guy's basically the head of the Klan in this area. And then they do battle throughout the movie, somewhat. Or people do battle around them, but the movie plays it up like it's their battle. It's like just one-on-one, but when it's not by any means. And eventually they become pretty much best friends, hence the title. The title's basically a spoiler because that's not really till like the last 5 minutes, but once again, it's history, it doesn't matter. So there is stuff in here where you can tell they maybe possibly have something interesting to say about the parallels about now and then. Like there's a whole debate about the Confederate flag that feels very much of that time and of now at the same time. And there's decent scenes here and there. Like there is Rockwell's wife is played by Anne Heche. So obviously they've been on separate sides of this for quite some time, but then there's a scene where the two of them just like get together and have tea, which sounds like a major cliche and like a setup for melodrama, but it's actually kind of nice when you actually see it, and the way it's kind of just downplayed in general, how it's really just kind of them talking and not much else. But the point is made, more or less. But, and you do have some scenes here, even if, obviously this is going to be one of those movies where if you look up on it, you can tell the story itself is very Hollywoodized, even though if this is, like, the very basic, you know, outline of it. But, so, obviously, there's going to be scenes here that, like, feel maybe suspenseful, I guess you could say, like the big vote scene at the end, even though, once again, we know exactly where it's going, there's still something there. Not say, like, you know, knowing the outcome of a vote than people were having, say, like, at the end of Lincoln. It's not that kind of... It's not that great. But there is a few individual moments in here, like, say, the moment when Rockwell explains how much it meant to him to get his KKK card. Which sounds weird, where it's like, you'd think when you hear that, that it's like, really something that's not even worth hearing. But the way Rockwell plays this and the way he explains it, it's like, there's almost a hint that you could potentially understand where he's coming from in some sense. But not in any way to... He doesn't, like, pull you to his side or anything, but it's like, for a second there, you get, like, the emotion behind what he felt he was doing in the moment. But then, obviously, this is just being used as the big turning point where he's... And yeah, where it gets all Hollywood on us. Still, but once again, there's still that line where, unless you're, like, really, 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 really familiar with history, it's hard to tell exactly what's what. So I couldn't even say for sure, but I did see a lot of criticism that I can totally understand about how there were a lot of complaints that this movie's interest seemed sort of overrun by, like, humanizing the people who were doing the terrible things as opposed to the victims of those people. And that's something I can get and something you can definitely tell. But at the same time, it's also just incredibly overlong. It's like 2 hours and 15 minutes or something, but it really doesn't have to be. And it's one of those cases where a lot of the points are made really early, despite that, but they just kind of keep having to ram them home. One of the ways they do that is a constant soundtrack that really adds nothing to anything except to scream, hey, this is the time period we're in. And it was really funny because shortly before I watched this movie, I had just revisited the Bill Burr bit where he talked about movies like this, and it's like how really sort of... I mean, it's touchy the way to do it the way he's a professional comedian. He can do it in a way that makes sense, but yeah, basically saying, why are they still making movies like this? In this particular way. Like, in his bit, the movie he used was Freedom Writers, which is now, like, 13 years old, and his bit was basically saying, like, how many times do you have to make this movie? And of course, yeah, there is a time now where the movies like this are becoming more relevant, but at the same time, it's the way these movies present themselves that are still not sitting right with people on either side. Because, like, it's almost kind of like what I was talking about with the Bundy movie, where it's like, it's like, in the moment it might feel hard-hitting, but then once it's all over, you're like, it feels way too safe, is what it is. So... Yeah, and really, if you want the whole thing anyway, I think there's a documentary from, like, 2002 or something. So it's like, in most cases with movies like this, it's like, there's probably a documentary out there, so you're probably much better off with that. As long as it comes from, you know, a credible source. There are documentaries out there that are totally full of shit, too, but if you find the right ones, that might be a better way to get history than, say, movies like this. But like I said, there are cases where you can tell, like, its heart is in the right place and all that, which you could say about a lot of these movies. But at the same time also, it's really heavy-handed, and maybe sometimes they don't quite hit the mark in the way they intend, or they go in maybe the wrong direction they probably should, or whatever. But, yeah, and of course, you know, you've got Taraji and Sam Rockwell, so the performances are going to be fine. And like I said, Rockwell almost makes you understand where this guy might be coming from, which is terrifying, but... Still, if you're in your right mind, you'll be able to get there, but also realize that to be able to condemn pretty much every single fucking thing this guy ever did. So, Yeah, so yeah, another one of those movies will come and go, and has come and gone. Now let's go on to 5 Feet Apart, which is yet another one of these that I went into kind of cynically because it's another venture into the whole teen love story by way of terminally ill characters movie. And like as soon as these two characters, Cole Sprouse and Haley Richardson, start talking to each other, like instantly, you just get immediate The Fault in Our Stars vibes. Which of course, Fault in Our Stars was by no means a movie that I cared for. And all these movies in general that are kind of like this, particularly with the characters that go through the same phases where it's like he's the way that he is, or like he's they even actually say something along the lines of he's the guy that like breaks the rules and plays his own game and stuff like that. And she calls him out for that, but it's like even though the movie has her call him out, he's still that cliche anyway. And the fact that she falls for him kind of makes her a cliche in herself as well. But there's still something about that the two of them have and their performances that kind of made me once again sort of begrudgingly like this more than I probably would have otherwise, with weaker performances. Because this whole idea, like even the first half hour or so was just like, I struggle to find where the appeal is in like the misery porn kind of thing. Especially with like younger audiences, when you see a lot of this stuff like The Fault in Our Stars and stuff like that just blowing up the way that it does. I would say it probably works so well on younger audiences is not only are they just sort of susceptible to the whole love thing at that age, but also the whole thing about basically the message being use the time that you have and live your life with, you know, the time that you have and all that. So that doesn't necessarily explain that there's still plenty of other crowds that this genre really goes for, like Beaches being a really wide example of like the Dying Friend movie or whatever, or pretty much any Lifetime movie you can name. So I kind of had to push through this for this being a genre that I never really just understood the appeal to at all whatsoever. But yeah, so you look at the Cole Sprouse character, and he has a way of kind of... They set up that cliche, and to their credit, they do find a way to make him, like... He does become, like, a really human character as it goes on, and doesn't just feel, like, necessarily like he's out of some young adult novel or something. But, yeah, and I actually had to look up to see if this was based on one of those. Apparently it's not. But, there is the whole thing where he does bring that way about him, because he's an act... I didn't realize how good he was going to be in this, because I wasn't really... Like, outside of Big Daddy, I'm not actually that familiar with him. Like, I don't... Like, I was never into the whole Disney Channel stuff, so I never saw any of those shows and stuff like that. But yeah, if this shows what he's got, he's really kind of turned into a really good actor, and of course Haley Richardson has been charming us for the past few years at least. Making this character, who might once again seem like a bit of a cliche, still, like, you know, really lovable, but also heartbreaking, especially when she goes into, like, her backstory, which is something that could be considered, like, really sort of... just in general, the whole backstory thing is the part where you're like, oh, this is where it's going to get, like, really tired, basically. But the thing about that is she has the backstory with her sister, which we see through one of her YouTube videos. And there is something, like, genuinely sad about it, like, with the connection that they had, and then when we learn... We don't learn right away exactly what happened to her, we just know something awful probably did, because she's not around anymore, and of course, Cole Sprouse isn't exactly subtle about this, because he feels that because they're already dying anyway, they might as well approach death directly in any circumstance, whatever that may be. Which of course is gonna maybe cause a rift between them, but I like that they didn't, like, wallow in that direction, and they actually used the sister storyline to just kind of understand where she's coming from in tragedy already, let alone what's happening to her personally. So I did like the way that was handled, and the way that when she finally does describe what happened and how it affects her is like something that feels like really real. Which is something that could have felt kind of phoned in just for the sake of being sad or manipulative or something. So I did like the way they handled that. And then throughout it, as like the love between them is getting bigger. There's the stuff like the scavenger hunt, which is like really sweet, and then there's the pool scene. The pool scene I could see being like almost like a future classic in the genre of these terminally ill teen love story kind of thing. It basically is its own genre at this point. So there is stuff like that, but at the same time there are still like way too many familiar beats. There's the whole subplot with her friend Moises, who's the guy that's always introduced to basically die, for us to know for sure that no matter what happens to the two main characters, he is absolutely gonna die, no matter what. That is his only reason for existing in this story. And it also kind of goes on a bit too long. Like, by the time it gets to the whole ice thing, I had pretty much checked out. It was getting, like, really kind of redundant at that point. It seemed like it was just kind of piling on the bad things that could happen to them. Like I said, kind of falling back into the misery porn angle of it a little bit. And the thing about it is, really, and it sucks to see the way to feel that way because of the way some of this is handled and the fact that I didn't really care much about Poe just because I pretty much knew his fate the second he walked on the screen. But that's the thing, is it's like you see enough of these movies and you're kind of just immune after a while to all these sad scenes, and they just really, as long as they continue to be the exact same thing, they're not really going to have that effect. So you kind of have to dig more into the characters, which, for the two leads, is what this movie does, which does end up making it more effective. And you really do have to commend this movie for I was really surprised by the unconventional ending to this. So that really stood out to me. So yeah, so there's a lot of things that just kind of feel like it really went in that cliche territory. It's a movie I went into just thinking I really wasn't gonna... Not that I was gonna think it was bad, that I just wasn't gonna care about it at all. And it was gonna just be kind of a 2-hour drag until it ended and be another one of these movies. But there is something in here, and like I said, it's mainly the appeal of the two leads themselves. And it is a movie where the characters work so well that I'm indifferent to it, more or less, but the more I think about it, the more I do kind of like it. So it's got that going for it, as far as my opinion is concerned. So yeah, it's a little better than I thought it would be, and Cole Sprouse and Haley Richardson are great together, and it's fine, even if the same cliche bullshit we see in this genre all the time. So let's go on to Breakthrough. Jesus, literally. So this is another one of those religious movies. It's not exactly a Pure Flix movie, but it pretty much might as well be. It's one of those movies that's not Pure Flix, pretty much only because they were able to get, for some reason, a really recognizable cast, like a big cast list. And our star is Christy Metz from This Is Us, who, to her credit, is pretty much perfectly cast as one of your garden variety church moms, I guess you could say. She's the one making breakfast, and the kid's there, and something happens, and the kid says, "What the hell?" and she screams language at him like she's Captain America or something. She's driving him to school, and she does the thing where he's listening to his headphones, and he's like dancing in the passenger seat. So she starts dancing in this embarrassing way to do that mom thing, and it's like, it just, in the distance you can hear all the church moms that saw this movie cackling, and it's and it becomes one of those movies until this kid falls through ice, being an idiot, and almost dies. He's in a coma, and they're basically trying to pray him to life, basically. It's one of those movies that's supposedly a true story, but then you have cases like there's the whole Miracles from Heaven thing, which it's clearly in the same vein as, and Heaven is for Real. Isn't Heaven is for Real, the one with Greg Kinnear, wasn't that the one that was like completely and totally debunked, and the kid basically came out and said, "Oh no, I was full of shit, sorry." So stuff like that, already, like, the movies like this are already hard enough to latch onto, which we'll get into more as to why, but that kind of thing isn't helping at all. And then, while she's trying to pray her son back to life, she's also kind of at odds with this new pastor that's played by Topher Grace, of all people. Yeah, so the people that made this movie were like, we need a guy that's going to spend a lot of his screen time giving speeches to impressionable people. Who do we cast? How about the guy that just played fucking David Duke? Oops. So, yeah, somehow Topher Grace ended up in this movie, but okay. The whole cast is such a big question mark in this movie. Like, Dennis Haysbert's in there, Josh Lucas is in there, and it's like, why do I recognize the people in this movie? This is really not the kind of movie that should gather names like this. Even if they're names that aren't, like, necessarily at the very, very top, there's still names that are above something like this, but regardless, that's what it is. And it's a movie where, like, we see the dates leading up to it. Where it's like, we know, we're seeing, like, oh, this is the month and the date and the year and all that. And it's like, why are they showing us this? And it's like, because we're eventually going to get to the date where the kid fell through the ice. And it's like, well, that's all good, but we don't know when the hell that happened. Your kid walking out on thin ice like a moron, not paying attention to the guy saying, dude, that's thin ice, get off, but he's too busy on his damn phone or whatever the hell and just falls through it, is not the sinking of the Titanic. That day is not something that is solidified in history books. I don't know why you're showing us the dates, but maybe I'm just being nitpicky about that. But there is something in here, though, that I would like to see in more of these movies. Despite the fact that it would be great to just not see any of these movies anymore ever again. There are, like, counterpoints where they're talking about just how much this character, Joyce, I think that's her name, of course her name's Joyce. But the thing is she's obviously, you know, ranting and raving like a lunatic about how as long as she keeps praying, God will bring her son back to life. And Josh Lucas, her husband, is here to basically say, behind, you know, closed doors, like, you know, I want to be there for her, but at the same time, and I do believe in God, but at the same time, I don't know how far faith goes with this. And it's like he's seeing it from that sort of perspective, where he's like, I will keep doing the pray thing, but I am conscious to the idea that that can only do so much. But mostly just for me spiritually in the moment. It's not gonna, we can't literally pray our son back to life. And then you've got Topher Grace talking to his wife over dinner, and he's talking about how, he's talking realistically, and he's like, it's great, that she sees it that way, but it's like, she is so, if you'll excuse the phrase, hell-bent on the fact that, God is gonna bring her child back to life, that should he die, she is so confident this is going to work that should he die, she is, like, screwed mentally, like, emotionally and all that other place. She is not prepared for the worst because of the praying and relying on that. Now, mind you, these are only, like there's just that one Josh Lucas scene and that one Topher Grace scene, and it's never really talked about again, and then it just becomes that whole thing, but still, yeah, and this isn't to say, like what we've talked about before many times, talking about, like, stuff like the God's Not Dead movies and all those Pure Flix movies, is it's like, it's not that, I don't mean to make fun of religion or religious people by any means whatsoever, it's the portrayal that is in these movies that basically makes religion a laughingstock to a lot of people, because you associate it with these people that, like I said, these movies that are so dangerous to impressionable people, I think. And it's like, you know, the dangerous to the people that we're talking about with Topher Grace and Josh Lucas, where it's like, we really, no matter how much you believe, you know, that kind of thing can only go so far, and to completely rely on that is going to do severe damage to you should the worst happen. Topher Grace literally lays it out and says that. But yet at the same time, it's basically seeming like it's pressing Chrissy Metz's perspective and assuming that's where its audience is and will stay after seeing this, and this will only further solidify that for them, and that's, I don't know that that's a good thing. So I don't know. So it's like these movies are embraced when really they should be the enemy of having religion with dignity. But yeah, so these movies will continue to exist, though, because they're still very successful. And then you just get weird. Like, by the end, when it's, a spoiler, I guess, he does actually wake up. Because it says on the poster, based on the impossible true story, because if it was impossible, he would obviously not have died. So, but then there's like a whole extra like half an hour after he wakes up for like this really lengthy epilogue, I guess you could say. And he gets confronted by a lot of people. They make fun of him for being like I don't remember what like Miracle Boy is what they call him, or something nobody would ever fucking say to anybody. And then he's actually stopped by his teacher, who actually, and they kind of somewhat call out like, oh, she probably shouldn't be doing that, but I mean, his teacher just flat out asks him to his face, basically, why did you survive when whoever my loved one was died? And like, she's sincerely asking him, like, almost like she's asking for advice. It's like, you know, like, God brought you back, but he didn't bring back my husband, whoever it was. So that's... I don't know. And it's full with all that, you know, Pureflix music and Christian rock or whatever the hell. And just, I guess, it's really just the same thing. Like, it may look like it has more dignity because it doesn't have the Pureflix logo on it. It's the same shit. Through and through. With just a tiny, tiny bit of awareness that it more or less ignores anyway after it brings it up. So, that's what that is. So let's go in an entirely different direction with Under the Silver Lake. A movie I've been meaning to get to for a while. It's by David Robert Mitchell, whose last movie was It Follows. And he also did a teeny, teeny, tiny movie in like the 2011 area called The Myth of the American Sleepover. And of course, when I reviewed It Follows, I wasn't very kind to it. I really didn't care for it. And I've seen it again since, and I still kind of don't care for it. I appreciate its style, but that's about it. So as far as this one goes, I was a little cautious, but the comparisons to Inherent Vice had me really interested. And it was like, okay, a movie that's like being compared to Inherent Vice from the director of It Follows, there's gotta be something interesting here. There's definitely something worth seeking out here. So it does have the noir style, and what I really liked about it pretty much immediately was it does manage to have that noir style, but at the same time you can tell that the noir thing is something that's kind of getting a bit played out lately. Like, people are kind of overusing it a little bit, and overusing the term itself, really. But this one doesn't feel overplayed at all. It feels very much kind of like it does have echoes of other movies, and there's certainly blatant influences of other directors, past and present. But it still kind of feels like its own thing, too, and it's really, like, intoxicating, weird sort of way. Like, there's a lot of weird characters that come in and out of it like you would expect in a movie like this. A lot of them are kind of like Coen Brothers-esque in the randomness of their existence, I guess you could say. And there's a lot of interesting settings also, like pre-existing settings, like real settings, like the way they use the planetarium, but the outside of the planetarium even more so. But there's also sets that they've obviously created for certain scenes that just kind of get increasingly bizarre as well. And it's like, whether it's, you know, already existing areas or obvious sets, the whole thing has a really nice look to it and feel to it. And the score also is kind of a big player in this, where it feels like a really classic sort of score. It's also, when we see, like, Riley Hugh for the first time, it's like, she feels like a classic femme fatale, and that's helped a lot by the score. There's a lot of intentional echoes to Bernard Herrmann, particularly his Hitchcock scores. And really just kind of, I guess, Hitchcock's feel in general, though there were a lot of cases where when he was driving around and there's like not much dialogue and it's just him going around, like obviously there's gonna be like a Vertigo feel a little bit, and trying to put the pieces together, but the way he was putting these weird pieces together, the more I felt like it kind of had a feel of Antonioni's Blow Up a little bit, which is really appealing. I really love that. And then as it goes on also, it could probably be a bit frustrating in how, like, intentionally cryptic it is. It's what makes the movie so weird and interesting is that it's simultaneously about different areas, cryptic and blatant. Like, it's very cryptic about its story and the whole thing, which is obviously the point. But it's also, as far as, like, its influences are extremely blatant. All the way up to the point that they're in a cemetery watching a movie on, like, a drive-in screen, and the tombstone there next to is Hitchcock in big letters. So it's like, and that's just one example. But there's still something here, like, it's almost like the fact that it almost feels intentionally blatant, like they're not necessarily trying to hide the fact, because they're too busy hiding everything else and like the contents of the story, if you can even call it that, the mystery about it, I guess you could say. And so yeah, so there's just really something totally, I hate to go back to the word intoxicating already, but that's just the word that keeps coming to mind. Like, it really just sort of, like, I was a little put off by the runtime, which is like 2 hours and 20 minutes. I was feeling like that might end up feeling a bit bloated. And while it does get there, it's like way on the back end of it for the most part. This movie really draws you into its like really weird world, especially when you're following this character played by Andrew Garfield, that is just so, like, we're with him with pretty much every scene. I scarcely remember a scene without him, if there even is one. But at the same time, there's still something so weird and exotic about him, that where it's like you really have no idea where exactly he's going to end up, or what decision he's going to make, or how much he's going to dive deep into this, because I can see people getting a bit frustrated about the fact that the whole movie hinges on the idea that he's desperately following Riley Hughes' trail after she disappears, despite the fact that they've known each other for like 4 hours, if that. Like, the length of How to Marry a Millionaire plus maybe an hour is how long they've known each other. But just the sight of her immediately brings them in. It's very much it has that Vertigo feel. So, but yeah, so like I said, that can maybe get a bit blatant, and maybe frustrate some people in regards to how it kicks off, but still, there's just something here that's just so inherently appealing that you just kind of go with it. You kind of let it take you, and it does. And you're not even trying to figure out what it is ahead of time, because you've seen enough movies like this, like Inherent Vice, where sooner or later the story's not going to matter if it even does at the start. So you're like, you know what? I'm just going to sit here and not think about it ahead of time. Just take me. Just take me wherever the hell we're going next. Whatever clue and whatever direction Garfield is sending next, that's where we're going. Whatever it may be, and I'm down for whatever's around that corner. But yeah, by the time like it gets to the last half hour or so, it does kind of dry up. It gets into like the number 23 levels of ridiculous in regards to the whole conspiracy and putting things together thing. And it really delves into the whole, like, once he gets to like the Hollywood parties and then where the story ends up going, it's really, like, there's themes in there, but they seem to really be beating us over the head with the whole, hey, did you know rich people are really weird behind closed doors sort of thing, or sometimes in plain sight sort of thing. And it kind of seems like once it has its grip on that, that's what it wants to run with the most. And it's like, we know that, we've seen that, we've done all that. And then you get into this whole thing of like, you know, is any of this even real? Is this some drugged out, like, intoxicated alternate reality or something? Where we start getting, we introduce this book that this dude has been writing, where we get, like, whole animated sequences that are, like, in the style of a graphic novel, that are really interesting, and kind of those elements in that book start finding their way into the story, and it comes this whole meshing of worlds, where it's, like, reality and whatever the fuck the other world is colliding. So there is that, and we get, you know, some standout scenes by themselves. There is a scene where Andrew Garfield confronts a songwriter at a piano that is pretty fucking amazing. And that's all I want to say about that. So, I do wish it hadn't kind of lost its way in that last half hour and kind of gotten more ridiculous and more, like, as game as I was for most of this, it's like the fact that you lost me is really disappointing, but, there's still definitely something interesting here, especially if you're just kind of into this style in general. And like I said, you don't really care where a story's going, whereas so much as the feel and the experience is taking you. If you just want to go with it, go with it. So that's pretty much the best way I can describe that without revealing too much about it. But even if I did say some revealing things out of context, it just wouldn't, even in context, I don't know how discernible they are, but still, yeah, so it is a fun ride while it lasts, but it does run out of gas with that 2-hour, 20-minute runtime, which sucks, but still. But yeah, so that's how I feel about that. So now we will go on to the man who killed Hitler and then the Bigfoot. That title is obviously one of those titles that was made to be attention-grabbing immediately, on top of the fact that they cast Sam Elliott as the title dude that did those things. Did one thing, will do another thing. So when it starts off, it's seemingly very normal. Like, if you were to see the beginning of this movie, you would never suspect the direction it's going if you don't know. So he appears to just be old Sam Elliott hanging out at a bar, because of course. And he's, has the ability to beat the shit out of muggers if they try to steal his car. He hangs out with his brother Larry Miller at the barber shop. He has little mundane back and forths with some of the contrast between him and the youth. There's a really nice line where he's at like a convenience store or something, and they're talking about a dollar bill or something that's been around seemingly forever, and the kid says something like, some of the old ones just hang around, like they never go away, like also referring to the people like Sam Elliott, obviously. And then, while this is happening, and it's kind of established as like this sort of 70s feel to it, like it was a movie that would have been made in that era. But then, as it goes on, we're getting flashbacks of when he was in World War II, and he was given a mission, which ultimately leads to him single-handedly killing Hitler. Just shooting him dead, Inglourious Bastard style. And then, obviously, he will eventually be approached, and they say, hey, we have an isolated area, and Bigfoot is there, and Bigfoot has a virus, and for some reason, in this very lengthy scene of them giving all this exposition on Bigfoot, we come to the conclusion, eventually, that Sam Elliott is the only person that is immune to this virus. So he is going to be sent in, and given his past history of executing seemingly elusive things, is given the single-handed opportunity to kill Bigfoot and keep this virus from spreading. So, obviously, there's a problem here tonally. I don't even think I need to describe the movie any further for you to say, I feel like this movie might have some tonal problems. So, before it goes into all the outlandish stuff, it's pretty grounded, more or less, which I guess is kind of somewhat the appeal of it. And then it's just going to be this big left turn when they do all this other shit. But the thing is that we're cutting back and forth with the Hitler thing between now and then the Bigfoot thing is like the second half of the movie, chronologically. So there's a whole thing where it's trying to simultaneously stay grounded, but also go like full Grindhouse. And there's obviously the Bigfoot scene itself, once it really gets going, is like so out of nowhere, over the top. And like to an extent, I can maybe see this being the point where it's kind of trying to contrast itself on purpose. But it's really just like, what really is the point? Especially since, like, when the Bigfoot thing starts, there is a lot of build-up to it, but when he's actually out there hunting him, or it, whatever you want to say, it's like we cut to it like in mid-chase. After the whole movie, which is most of the movie before it, is like so contemplative about itself. And it's just really jarring, like, all the way down to it once we get to this whole thing. And I don't know, I just really have no idea what this movie is trying to do. You get a sense of, once again, it's something I kind of went into cynically again, because just the words in this title, and looking at the title in itself. I'm sure there's a creative mind that came up with this, that like really had something inside them. This is a story they wanted to tell. This is them artistically expressing themselves. But a cynical part of you might also look at a title like this and say, wow, this is somebody screaming at the heavens for attention. This is somebody that really wants to bring in those people that are easily swayed by an outlandish title. The people that will flock to any like Nazi zombie movie or something. So that see Iron Sky as like Citizen Kane. So that's really what it ends up feeling like overall, because like I said, it seems like they're trying to do something more with it until their tones start fucking with each other, and then it's like, did you really have a plan here though? Because I can't. It's really hard to see, and I don't know. But even so, there is still an interesting idea here that you can connect those two things more or less seamlessly once you look at the layout of it. And I think the structure works too. The whole flashbacks and then it leading to the Bigfoot thing being like the whole thing. Like, obviously the tonal problem is there, but as far as structure goes, if they had been able to pull off a tone, that structure is fine the way it is. But still, and I think the simplicity of it works in its favor once it finds its footing, where it's literally the whole layout is in the title. But it's just so damn all over the place and just has such an unfocused vision about itself, that it just kind of is what it is. Like, it doesn't go beyond its title the way I feel like it was really trying to, so... but I mean, if you're still setting out to do new and interesting things, or maybe not necessarily new, but interesting things, that's still great, but, yeah, I don't know if this is entirely the way to do it, so there is that. So now we'll go on to, High Life. High Life I talk about with extreme caution, because this is one of those movies that's impossible to decipher what exactly is saying too much about it, because this movie has a lot of secrets. But it is worth noting first that it comes from Claire Denis, the famous French director who did, like, I think her most famous movies are like White Material and Beau Travail and Chocolat. Not the Chocolat you might know, the Lassie Alstrom movie, though this movie does have Juliette Binoche in it, interestingly enough. And also, The Intruder is a pretty beloved movie of hers, which is really funny because it's so far away from the movie called The Intruder we just talked about, so completely and totally different, I promise you. And she's one of those directors that's really interesting because her career and filmography is just so diverse, and she's covered so many different territories and said so many different things in so many different ways. And so in this one, she's kind of going towards the new trend of isolated in space movies, which we've been seeing a lot lately, like The Martian and Gravity and Moon. Even not recent, you can see a lot of like Tarkovsky's Solaris in it. Honestly, you can even see quite a bit of Interstellar in it if you really want to. And so a lot of it starts off, it seems like it's got one thing going on, where we spend a lot of time at the start here with Robert Pattinson, isolated in space, but with an infant child that he's taking care of. That may or may not be his, it's unclear at the start. But then, as it goes on, there is a puzzle that starts falling into place, and more is revealed as to who exactly he is and how he got here and why he's here, and why he's now the only one left. There is an opening shot that shows us that there was obviously a whole crew here that is no longer here. This really magnificent shot that shows off the title almost 20 minutes into the movie, interestingly enough. And yeah, and then it's just one of those things you kind of go with. And the Fracture timeline, I did really like. That's one of those things where it could seem a bit intentionally jumbled, where it could be frustrating. But I like the way they handled it well enough that it felt like pieces of a puzzle that were just kind of naturally falling into place the more the movie went on, and we could fit together exactly what was going on. But at the same time, it is one of those cases where, and then he's one of these directors that really kind of stays away from exposition, like almost entirely, which is interesting because there is so much to explain. Yet there is practically no exposition, which it's kind of all in the visuals and watching exactly what the characters do, and then you can kind of slowly put it together as it goes. Which is really refreshing, even though sometimes it could be almost a bit too vague, like a little too vague for its own good, even though it kind of seems to be going for a bit of an abstract thing over most things. But yeah, and the thing is though, is we get a feel very, very early as to what kind of movie it is. Like, when we see kind of all this stuff falling into place, and a lot of it doesn't make sense at the start, and nothing's getting explained, we get the idea pretty quickly that it's just not going to be that kind of movie that's going to tell us everything. So that is refreshing when it seems like a lot of movies, you know, these days, like average movies, are so falling into the exposition hole just all over the place. Like, they're really losing faith in their audiences, and this one kind of avoiding it entirely. Like I said, even if maybe sometimes they go a bit much in just relying on ditching that, like, might harm it just a little bit, I can still really appreciate it regardless. So yeah, apart from all that, it is pretty much all about, like, its mood and its visuals and that whole abstract thing. Like, it's not, despite the fact that there's quite a few characters in it, it's not a character piece at all. So it's like, if that's the kind of thing that could potentially have driven this in another direction or a more clear direction, that's not what we're getting here. The characters more or less just feel like set pieces apart from Pattinson and, to an extent, Juliette Binoche. Mia Goth has a pretty crucial part also, but once again, there's so many things that are unclear about the characters to the point that we can tell. I don't think we're supposed to care that much about it anyway. But regardless of it not necessarily being a character piece, I do think the Pattinson scenes with the baby by himself really work. Like, there's a real tenderness to them, and he's really great in this. This is another continuation of Pattinson making, like, these really interesting career decisions lately, which he's now starting to balance out with the more blockbuster types. But I can see, even if, you know, he's going to be Batman, he's doing Nolan's new movie, I don't think he's going to stray away from movies like this at all. I think that's way too much in his wheelhouse now, and he really carries this kind of stuff well. Like I said, even a movie that's not a character movie at all, he can carry with a performance regardless. Though, like I said, it is much more about the mood and the visuals in this case. So yeah, but it does feel like there is more to this that they could have explored, and not have to go into they can still ditch the exposition, but it still felt like there was more that they could have explored, but it seemed more like after a while it was just going in directions that kind of honestly felt like they were just being weird for the sake of it, like for the shock value of it. So that was kind of, and I could see this movie being seen as, like, you know, superficial. But I think there is just enough here to appreciate in regards to what they did with the whole feel of it and the visuals and all that, and the way that they actually had the balls to just let it go with itself and not try to explain everything and all that. So there's definitely something here worthwhile, especially particularly for, like, you know, the art house crowd or whatever, but I still think they could have done maybe just a little bit more. There's still something that feels a bit hollow about it, regardless of how much they get out of just the visuals alone, so yeah, that's what that is. Next is going to be Wine Country, which is basically Sideways for Your Grandma, which is a movie that Amy Poehler directed, where she got a bunch of her Saturday Night Live buddies together, like Tina Fey and Maya Rudolph and Rachel Dratch and Anna Gasteyer and Paula Bell, who actually is more well known for writing, I think. And the movie is basically self-explanatory. They get together for a birthday party and they go to Wine Country and they do stupid shit that they think is funny, I guess, but to us is just a giant boring drag. It's basically littered with those really cliche characters where Amy Poehler's the one that lives and dies by an absolute definitive schedule. Anna Gasteyer's the one that's, like, obsessed with work and constantly on her phone and getting on everybody's nerves because of that. And it goes on, and it's one of those cases where you can just tell looking at it, as soon as they're introduced, that these characters all have one character trait, and each one of those character traits is going to come into play in the inevitable conflict towards the end of the movie when we should be ending, where everybody's going to be all mad at each other and sulk and all that shit. So we get to look forward to the movie. We get to look forward to that part of the movie through the entire thing because we know these character traits, and we get to deal with them through the whole thing until they cause problems, which is great. And in between their one little individual character traits each, we have fart jokes, we have, let's just say, fuck a lot kind of comedy, Hey, we're, getting up there in age. Drugs are funny when we do them, apparently, or not even do them, talk about doing them. And this movie is also obsessed with its own running jokes. So you don't fill your movie with running jokes unless you're under the impression that you think you're hilarious, which you're not. The whole thing with saying Jason Schwartzman eventually finds his way into this somehow. And there's a joke that he just comes with the house they're staying at. So, like, he comes with the house, it's said, like, every 10 minutes once Jason Schwartzman's introduced. There's a running joke where he's, like, making some sort of something, some kind of food that takes forever, and that goes over days. They keep bringing that back. The whole thing where whenever Rachel Dratch says feedback, they sing. I still don't know what the hell that is, but running joke, apparently. The only funny joke in the movie whatsoever, which I suppose gives it one more laugh than little, is something involving a Fran Drescher-themed art gallery. Which is a funny concept, which is pretty much what makes the joke. But of course, the movie finds a way to drag this out. The scene goes on way too long, and by then the joke is ruined. The only joke they had. So there's that. And so it's, of course, one of those movies, as you can probably guess, where when they're not just rambling incoherently, trying to find something funny to say, and failing. I'm assuming there was no script to this whatsoever. They thought they were funny enough to carry it, I guess. And in any other circumstance, they probably would be. But this movie is not that movie. So they're just rambling incoherently, and we only get breaks from that when they decide it's time to dance. So there's scenes of dancing, and more scenes of dancing, and more scenes of dancing. There is a whole scene devoted to them picking out the music for which they will dance to. And that's all the movie is. That's it. Everything I just said to an hour and 43 minutes, which is really weird that it got all the way to an hour and 43 minutes, because does this not sound like desperation? Does this not sound like a movie that is, like, dragging itself as much as it can to try to get to feature length and just barely making it? No, they get all the way to an hour 43 with this shit. So you can realize how much of this can easily go. I would choose the whole fucking thing, but that's just me. So, yeah, obviously, these are very funny people and have been before, but it's like, because they think because they think each other is hilarious in real life because they all know each other and they're all comedians to one extent or another, you can see where they thought they had something good here, but it's not here. It's just embarrassing, unfunny, and lazy. So there's that. Thank you once again, Netflix. I'm not surprised at all. The next one is going to be The Kid Who Would Be King. This is one of the ones I saw like months and months ago, so I'm really going to struggle to remember this, especially since it's not that memorable anyway, so this should be fun. The main attraction, obviously, was that Joe Cornish made it, and this was Joe Cornish's big, not necessarily comeback, but his first movie since Attack the Block, as far as him directing. And Attack the Block was one of my favorite movies of 2011, like top 5. It was so creative and like so out of nowhere, and also so hilarious and still kind of brutal too. There's just so many things to love about that movie, so many totally different things. So it's like, how is he going to do about this? But the thing about it is, between like the violence and the language and the stuff like that, obviously Attack the Block was pretty R-rated, and this is a PG movie intended for like a young audience. Which wasn't putting me off, but I was thinking, like, that's a really interesting curve to make after that. But I felt like he could pull it off, especially since the characters in Attack the Block are so young anyway, that, you could just do that, only make it PG. Why not? And adding in all the King Arthur legend and stuff like that, complete with, you've got the main kid who's played by Andy Serkis' son, and they throw in these characters that are so obvious, references. He's bullied by 2 kids named Lance and Kay, which of course are Lancelot and Kay. But the thing is it feels kind of off, because we get stuff like the way they bully him is they say stuff like, "I'm gonna punch my pin number into your legs," or something like that. I don't know. I guess that's what bullies say now. I don't know. But, yeah, and then, of course, eventually, the whole King Arthur legend comes into this, and he becomes a part of that, and then they all come together, and there's an adventure of sorts with a villain that's Rebecca Ferguson, I want to say. And then one of the interesting concepts that it has, and as much as I'm not really a fan of the movie, there is a lot of interesting stuff in here. It's just a matter of what they do with it and how far they take it. Like throwing Merlin into it. And of course making Merlin a young character because he's, you know, aging backwards, but they also, not only are they doing that, but he's also like a fish out of water character. So there is something sort of funny that in general, and then eventually when he ends up being Patrick Stewart. And of course just Patrick Stewart himself adds like some sort of, you know, sort of regal quality to the movie, just with his presence alone, which is nice. And so you kind of expect this nice, you know, King Arthur-inspired adventure between these kids, and it's going to be like it's on this grand scale, kind of starting off in like, you know, all the kids are just in school and all shit's in his backyard, but then it gets kind of grander and grander as it goes. But it also kind of started to feel, in some cases, I was getting vibes of, I don't know if anybody remembers a movie called Warriors of Virtue. It was from like, I want to say 97 or something, where it was like the ninja kangaroos or whatever they were. Even if you don't know what that is, you probably have an idea just based on that alone. And I was getting sort of that vibes of it, which, as you can tell, is not exactly a compliment. But yeah, but there still is like some creativity in here. There's one scene in particular that really stood out, where like a knight sort of materializes in his backyard and comes for him, and it's like, it feels like a scene out of a horror movie almost. So that's crazy, and there's the stuff, like the training with like the trees and stuff like that. There's plenty of stuff in here that goes that creative route, and with that sort of idea, they could run with this, but it really loses its footing pretty fast, and I kept coming like in and out of it, like losing interest repeatedly, and slowly coming back in, but then getting lost again. And I think that doesn't help also that it feels so damn long. It's only 2 hours. It's only like an hour 59 even, if you want to say. It's 1 minute shy of 2 hours. And this thing feels like an eternity. And it's like, when it seems like it's reaching an ending, there's like half an hour left where we have to do a whole other big thing. And it just really feels like it's dragging the runtime, but still, there was potential in the climax, I thought, because like I said, almost like in that Attack the Block appeal, where it's like the younger people taking care of everything, so, yeah, but really I just remember mostly being bored with it, so I really don't have much else to say about it like that. You could really see a lot of the potential here, and I liked what they were going for. It was certainly a winning idea, but I don't think they did as much with it as they could. So let's go on to A Dog's Way Home. This is the one with the poster where the dog's sitting in the shoe. Not to be confused with A Dog's Purpose, or A Dog's Purpose, a sequel that just came out, A Dog's Journey. There's Home in the title. You've got another dog movie called Far From Home, which now also shares a title with a Spider-Man movie. So nobody knows what the hell is going on with any of these movies, or which one is which, or whatever. But I'll tell you which one this one is. A Dog's Way Home is one where the dog is raised by a cat and speaks to us, the audience, through narration. Narration provided by Bryce Dallas Howard. I wasn't aware the dog was female until Bryce Dallas Howard started talking, and then it was like, okay, I see what they're doing. And it does kind of have a rocky start, particularly with pretty much any of the scenes where she's with her owner. Her owner, whose name is Lucas. Yes, because that comes into play. But because we have like this very startling transition where she goes from puppy to grown dog that's going to be in the rest of the movie. It's like an actual transition to that, and it's really fucking weird when it happens. And there's some ill-advised things here and there, you can tell, like, not even in necessarily the story, but like, the idea that there is a scene in this movie where the dog is walking down the hallway and all the happy music is playing, but for some reason they decided to film the dog's asshole while it was walking down the hallway, and that's where they decided to put the camera. I don't know whose decision that was, but they're the person in charge of this movie, so this is only the beginning. But no, this is actually a movie that might be better than it looks, and that could just be, like, it could just be a dog person thing, where if you're a dog person, this might appeal to you just inherently, I guess. Because there are some things I kind of found that I liked in it as it went on. It took a while, but as it went on, I found some things to like about it. Like, I like the idea that she interacts with a lot of other dogs a lot, but apart from her narration, none of the other dogs, we never really hear the other dogs. They are just kind of there, and like that's the only real voice that we have. Because this could have turned into a full blown talking dog movie, which they avoided. So there is that. But it's also kind of goes into some dark places and some really like genuinely sad places. Due to the circumstances of how she ends up lost and needing to find her way back, the dog is like, she spends the whole movie blaming herself for the fact that this happened, when it was something that was pretty much out of everybody's control. And it's like that's a continuous thread is just genuinely heartbreaking. There's the whole thing where, like, because she's got the blanket that's her owner's, so she calls it her Lucas blanket. And she's like, there's a moment where she's like in like this sinister looking pound or whatever, and she's like, this would be so much better if I had my Lucas blanket. Stuff like that. That just sort of, granted, in a very easy way, but even so, just kind of hit you in that place. And then there's other cases of, like, when I was talking about how she hangs out with other dogs, and they appear to be other lost dogs. And then there's this genuinely sad moment where she realizes as they're walking off, they all start to part ways. And it's because none of the others are strays like she is, or lost like she is. They just hang out all day, and then they go back home. They have a home to go back to. And it's just watching them all part away from her. It's like, there's really some genuinely sad scenes in this, and I haven't even mentioned the Edward James Olmos subplot yet. I say subplot, he's only in the movie for like a minute, but it is so unexpectedly dark, the direction this Edward James Olmos thing goes. If we had more time, I'd probably explain the whole thing, but I do want to keep moving. But yeah, it's a dark direction. Sometimes the movie does get in over its head. Eventually she runs into a CGI cougar. She gets involved in an avalanche. It tries to get bigger as it goes, and as it tries to get almost more effects heavy, it kind of stops working in that more, smaller way that it was when she was just roaming around. And it does become really repetitive about her finding places where they want her to stay, but she has to keep going on her journey. She has to get back to Lucas and all that. And a lot of this is accompanied by, pop versions of pre-existing songs, and that's when it starts to fall into the tropes of movies like this, is when it kind of starts to get into a place where it's like, there's a lot of potential here, but it's still one of these movies at its core. So there's that. Now, the main thing that this movie apparently got a lot of attention for, and I thought it was exaggerated because it is something that you see a lot nowadays. The whole reason I decided to stop watching trailers about how they kind of show too much and a lot of the money shots are in them and all that, and some of the plot points. This was a movie that I heard a lot of people talking about because they said literally the entire movie was in the trailer. Like, the very beginning, all the stuff that happens to the dog, and then the dog coming home and jumping back into Lucas's arms. So after I saw the movie, I went and I watched that trailer, and yes, the beginning, middle, and very end of the movie are all condensed into the trailer. Like, there is not a missed beat from the entire movie in that trailer. There is no exaggerations. So, if you want to see this and you want to hit all those points, there it is for you on YouTube in the span of like 2.5 minutes. There you go. But yeah, despite the fact that it is that simple and that cliche and all that, it still does have like a genuine heart to it. And the dog is really sympathetic. Like I said, it's probably mainly, regardless, you'll take to it if you're a dog person one way or another. And I think a lot of that also is Bryce Dallas Howard's charm in her narration, her voice work. So it makes the dog even more lovable than it already would be. So it's fine for what it is. Let's go into an entirely different direction now. Let's go to the ball of sunshine that is Lords of Chaos. Lords of Chaos is a movie about a black metal band in Norway, who basically are going to be... The whole thing is basically that they're the first ones on that scene in Norway. So that's how they're going to get famous, on top of some other crazy shit. And it's set somewhere in the 80s, I think, and is surprisingly, apparently a partly true story and partly fiction. I looked it up, like, the characters in the movie are real people, and apparently a fair amount of things in the movie probably possibly happened. Maybe not exactly in that way, but there is the whole thing where the band came out and said they think the movie's just a big fuck you, and there was the whole confusion about whether or not they had the rights to the music. The director said yes, they totally did. Apparently the band said no, they didn't. And somewhere in the movie you can actually hear the actual music. I don't know. So there's like so many combating stories going into that. But honestly, if I just went into this like without that, like I didn't know when I knew of the movie. Like shortly before I watched it was when I found out that it was a at least partially true story and these were real people. And if I didn't know that going in, that probably never would have crossed my mind. I never would have guessed that these were real people and some of these were potentially real events. It's that insane. So, it begins with Rory Culkin, who's our main character, narrating. And he says, this is my life story, and it will end badly. And it's like, he is not fucking kidding when he says that. Not even in the slightest. The narration also kind of gave, and the kind of vibe itself gave me a sort of a vibe of like SLC Punk. Which I'm a huge fan of, which I'm not I wouldn't say I'm a big fan of this, but if you like one, there's a decent chance you'll like the other to an extent. That being said, the director is the guy that did Spun, the meth movie with Jason Schwartzman, with a cult following, and he did Polar, which if you have been watching these videos know that I think Polar is very easily one of the worst movies of the year, if not the last few years. And I really didn't care for Spun either. So, yay. So, going into and there was also, the whole thing about, apparently there were some reports of this is one of those movies where people were supposedly fainting at screenings, which is usually blown out of proportion, and it's like it was usually something else that was the problem, and all that. So, but I don't know. But regardless, as it goes on, it's the whole, it kind of builds where they're starting the whole let's start a band thing, and then it's like, well, we've got to become famous. So then it's basically becomes like the Project Mayhem portions of Fight Club. They start doing that kind of shit. Their band name is even called Mayhem, so it makes perfect sense. And yeah, and then once it gets to that point, it's, as you probably guessed, a movie that just completely and totally wallows in unpleasantness. And that might sound weird to say because, of course, unpleasantness is going to come with the territory. That's a given. But the thing about it in this circumstance, though, is, like, a lot of it is in, like, severe close-up, and they're not, to their credit, I guess, they're not cutting away from anything. No pun intended. But it's like the scenes go on and on and on and on and on. And it felt more like there are two stabbing scenes in this movie with the way they go on and on and on and on and on, and in their brutality and in their in-your-face quality of it was reminding me of the rape scene in Irreversible. Remember how that just went on and on and on and on and just would not stop? It's like that, and it's like you can only take so much of that. And it's like, because the thing about that is, I have actually admired scenes like this before. Remember, I was talking about the stabbing scene at the end of Tom Hardy's Legend. That is fucking insane and so fucking vicious and goes on and on and on. But that's why it kind of worked and how disturbing it was. And it's like, now imagine, we get that stabbing scene in Legend, we get that twice in this movie, only like double or even triple it in length, and we get two of them in this movie. And it's really just in a nutshell the kind of movie that it is. So, like, all the characters are pieces of shit, everything is unpleasant, and everything is in your face, the gore, everything. But the thing that kind of fucks this up, I think, is I've talked about how much I don't care for this director before because this guy wouldn't know tone if it jumped up and bit his fucking head off. So you're watching it and it's like, is it trying to have fun about itself? Is it a cautionary tale? The Rory Culkin character, is he a protagonist or an antagonist or neither? And how does he... that may not even matter. What matters is, how does he feel about these characters when he makes this movie? And that is entirely unclear. So, it's... yeah, so, like, it's really all over the place in that regard. No idea what the hell it wants to say by telling this story. Because this isn't the kind of story... This is the kind of story you have to be passionate about. This isn't the kind of story that you tell to say, hey, these are real events, these are real people, and this is how it played out. Especially with how much of this is potentially not true or exaggerated. It's like you have to... You must have a real certain thing you want to say by telling this story. And that is not apparent in the slightest, in any degree whatsoever. But still, you know, the performances are fine, and, like, to an extent, you can admire just sort of the audacity of it, and how far it does go, and how much it doesn't want to cut away from. There's also a really disturbing performance from Jack Kilmer, plays one of the crucial characters in the first half hour, that kind of sets off the madness of everything we see. But yeah, apart from things here and there that I kind of admire, it's really just, it's just really not my thing. It's this, movies like this, I'd much more gravitate to something like SLC Punk or something like that, so there that is. Then we'll go on to My Days of Mercy, which is a movie with an interesting setup, but maybe that's it. This is the movie you may have been hearing about with Ellen Page and Kate Mara, where they fall in love, but they're on opposing sides of the death penalty argument, where Ellen Page and her whole family are, you know, against the death penalty, and Kate Mara and her family are for it, and so they're all going to these protests, and they eventually have, like, this sort of star-crossed love thing going on. And so, interesting setup, for sure, and two actresses that are fully capable. Ellen Page, obviously, when she's, like, really, really on, there's, like, she's unmatched. But the thing here is that you would think, given that, that this movie, regardless of what it obviously, you know, it might have some political things to say, but it feels like it should mostly be character-driven. Especially with, like, sort of the odd ways that they interact. Make it feel unique in a certain way. But it honestly really, after a while, doesn't feel as character-driven as it could or should. For the first little bit there, it kind of does, where it almost feels like it's lingering and just kind of letting the characters feel lived in. And we really get a sense of just their sort of natural lives before all this other stuff happens. But it's... yeah, but then after a while, it starts to feel very much like a scripted movie, and not like a sort of... like, because those early scenes, it almost feels like the camera's just lingering on, like, real people. But then it becomes very movie-like very quickly. So one of the things I noticed, which is obviously for mainly purposes of the script, because of course it's hiding something, despite how real the characters are supposed to feel, we never really get the individual perspective or side of Mercy. Her name's actually Mercy, the Kate Mara character. And so we only ever see her through the Ellen Page scenes. And it's like, you can tell there's something missing there, and it sort of makes the romance scenes sort of lacking something. Where it's like we only feel like we're coming from one direction, when it feels like we should totally be coming from these opposing views, because that's the whole point, is they're coming from these opposing places. But we only really feel like we're on one side of it, so that really hinders that. But then there's also these other issues that it wants to talk about, but it never really goes that far into those either, or never goes deep enough into them, despite wanting to cover so many things. So it really does feel like there's something missing here, but there's still something to the style of it that kind of works and brings it to life enough to get through, I guess you could say. But the performances are doing that fine also, but there's also, like, these little things that kind of make you wish the movie had taken more of a style on itself, like the way they show... there's a continuous thing going on where they show, like, the last meals of inmates that are on death row as they're, like, right before they're executed, and the way those meals differ, and kind of says something about the character of these people that we've never seen or met. So if it had... I feel like there's a lot of stuff here that is in here, and, like, if they stuck with it, they probably would have had something really special, but there's still... it just feels like parts of it are missing, and it's not saying enough about pretty much anything, not the characters or its topics or anything like that. So it's just kind of all surface level there, but it does have a fair amount of like raw emotion in it. Like obviously the passion between the two of them in the romance scenes, but also in the scenes where they're like dealing with grief, feel like really raw and real. But apart from that, just all very surface level stuff. So that's kind of disappointing given what this movie could have been. But there's a couple of things that keep it a little bit afloat, so there is that. Alright, let's go into The Silence. Yet another failed movie that Netflix put out. And before going into this, I don't even remember it like being like officially released. It was one of those movies that I kind of gradually heard about, and then I ended up coming across it. And the thing that I kept hearing was, oh, it's that movie that's basically just A Quiet Place, or it's like a total A Quiet Place ripoff. And it's like, I feel like sometimes when people call movies a ripoff, they're not giving them quite enough credit. Like, yeah, you can have a similar concept, but you can do different things with it. You can, maybe have, characters that feel like their own thing or something. Just do your own thing with it, even if it's a similar concept. Well, after watching The Silence for 2 minutes, and as it went on, yes, it proved itself to be an almost embarrassing ripoff of A Quiet Place. Starting with, and a little bit of Bird Box also. Netflix is kind of ripping themselves off in the process. It's like, oh yeah, we made that really enormously popular thing. We had all the memes and shit. That's great. But no, it's definitely A Quiet Place above anything else. Because it starts off with the narration of a deaf girl. A deaf girl with her parents and her little brother stuck in this world with monsters who hunt by sound. And if you make one teeny tiny little sound, they're going to find you and they're going to annihilate you. I mean, that's pathetic. That's really... but anyway... so she's narrating and she says, like, she basically spells out everything we liked about the Millicent Simmons character in A Quiet Place without the movie telling us. She says, well, I know silence because I live in silence, so I know how to do this. This is how I'll survive because this is how I live anyway. And it's really funny that she says that because all of the characters speak anyway. Like, because of her, they all know sign language, like A Quiet Place. But, yeah, all the characters just go ahead and speak in this. They just speak in whispers. Even her, even despite being deaf, and they say she hasn't been deaf her whole life or anything, so that might be their explanation for how she's able to speak clearly. But I would still think, I'm not an expert on this or anything, but I would still think, if you've been deaf for at least a decent amount of time, or any time whatsoever, you may not be speaking as clearly as this girl is. But that's what they do. They just drop that aside anyway and go on it. So there's really no reason for her to be deaf at this point. They fucking talk. It doesn't come into play. They don't use it to go after the monsters. That's like the one thing they don't do that A Quiet Place did. So whatever. So once they go into that, and they establish everything, we kind of go into characters somewhat, but most of them don't matter in the long run. It's mostly just her and Tucci off by themselves for a good majority of the movie. But for the first half hour or so, they've got John Corbett and everybody else, and John Corbett's basically here to be like an exposition machine, and then he's the one that kind of, takes action, which is useful except for the fact that he's gone before the movies have even been on for half an hour. So it's just the family now, and then most of them kind of just get cast aside, so it doesn't even matter. And then there's a lot of sloppy sort of, I don't know if you call it world building, but establishing the whole thing in general, like the whole premise. There's one point when they get confronted by a woman with a shotgun who's making a shitload of noise because she thinks they might be a threat. How has this woman survived this long? How? It's like, surely this is not the first time she's done this, and if this is her reaction to two people, one of which is a little girl, this woman should not be alive, and obviously isn't for very long anyway. But there is something they kind of tackle occasionally that would work if they build on it also, but it's really kind of a last-minute thing that it really comes into play. But the whole idea of coming across other people in this world and not knowing for sure if they're an ally or if they're dangerous. and for that to kind of be, basically it's a flip of the coin, which is which. And the whole Reverend character is pretty creepy for the very little screen time that he has. But yeah, they barely stay on any of the things that do work, and they just go back to the old shit. And then after a while, it's just the same boring shit of them going from place to place, rummaging through shit, and just hoping they don't come across something that will eat them. And they usually come across somebody dumb enough to make noise anyway, just for something to happen. So there is that. But I mean, this is really hard to get away from. The rip-off thing. And of course, you know, the people that know me know I practically worship A Quiet Place as it is, but still. The weird thing about it especially is that in real life, we know that Stanley Tucci is Emily Blunt's brother-in-law. He's married to her sister. So what is that Thanksgiving like? When you've got Stanley Tucci, who's been in the business since at least, what, the 80s? Or the late 80s or something. The dude's practically a legend, and everybody loves him. He's been around forever. And he's sitting there, and you're like, so, Stanley, what movie are you doing right now? It's like, how do you even explain that? Like, how do you keep your dignity and sit across from these people at a family table? It just doesn't. I really want to be a fly on the wall with that discussion, but regardless, it doesn't matter. So, yes. They're pursued by monsters that hunt by sound. One of the protagonists is a deaf girl. The scream sacrifice scene is here. And yes, the last shot of the movie is somebody prepping a weapon just before it cuts to black and we get the credits. It is right down to it. So fucking shameless. It's ridiculous. And like I said, hard to ignore. And the funniest thing, the final punchline of me talking about this movie, I started watching this on Netflix, and I watched it for the first hour, and then I ended up having to leave to go somewhere. This was like, you know, a month or so ago. And so I leave, and my intent is to finish The Silence when I get back. And so we come to now, before I did this video, and I go back and I realize I don't remember what I can say about The Silence because I don't remember much of anything. I don't even remember how it ended. And I go back to Netflix and I realize I forgot to finish it. I forgot I didn't finish the fucking movie. A month later, I remember. So, I had to finish that last half hour, then do this. At the very last second. That is how unmemorable this movie will be, and how pointless it is. And it just feels even more pointless at this point, the fact that we're getting A Quiet Place 2 very, very soon, much to my pure happiness. So, worthless. Absolutely, completely, and totally worthless. So, going on to Between Worlds, because I love talking about my Nicolas Cage movies. And yeah, obviously I do get a pleasure of talking about his movies and watching his movies because I say you have no idea what that motherfucker's going to do next, regardless of what movie he's in. And that's what makes him so appealing. Fuck anybody that says he is a terrible actor. They do not realize... Number one, there's so many movies they have apparently missed where it's like genuinely good, where it's like, you know, practically prestige movies, like Joe. But I mean, I think his name's Joe in this too, weirdly enough. And then there's movies that are very basic and straight to video that he elevates with his insanity and his willingness to do anything, to throw himself balls first into a role. But with this, I feel like there was a slip-up because the movie's error is the movie itself is trying to be as crazy as he is, or as his character is, whichever you want to say. Both are correct, probably. So it's like this movie feels more like it was made to fuck with us. And it's like they throw so much at you all at once. Like, before it's even 10 minutes in, that makes you say, what the fuck even is this? So you've got, like, this is all less than 10 minutes in. A scene begins, and they're playing, like, normal, you know, thriller music, like, we're kind of building to something. But the scene starts with the clerk at a gas station, and the shot begins on the dude's ass sticking out of his jeans, and pans up his back to Cage on the other side of the counter. While serious, like, thriller music is playing, because we know something's gonna go down. Alright. Then after this, at the same convenience store, he's just starting to read, after he's paid for everything, he starts reading magazines and eating, like, cakes and shit. And he does, like, this gag thing. And it's like, yeah, this is the kind of stuff, this stuff's the reason I watch Nicolas Cage movies. But then it keeps going, and then there's the whole thing where he stops a woman from being strangled, Franco Batente from Run Lola Run, and The Bourne Identity, I think. And he pulls him off of her, and he screams at the guy, "Have you ever wrestled a man-gator?" And it's like, yes, we are at peak Cage right now. There is no way to go. And then, when she leaves, they get in his truck, and she starts telling him his life story, completely and totally impromptu. And it's like, I have to keep registering, do they know each other? And I just missed something? No, this is their first time meeting, but then it's like they're best friends within 10 seconds of him supposedly saving her from a strangulation. Once again, not even the 10-minute mark yet. But then finally it turns out that if she, like, gets close to death, like, if she gets strangled, she can, like, go to the other side, or, like, not the other side, but, like, the middle between, I guess, and find her daughter, who is in, like, a coma and is about to die. And that's what she was trying to do, and that's basically the premise of the movie, but Cage's dead wife ends up inside her daughter's body, and it becomes a weird sex movie, basically, to be quite honest. And yeah, and scenes like this of them in the hospital waiting to find out if her daughter's gonna live or die is met with music. We've got a score that sounds like a rejected Pink Panther theme. Then there's something totally serious also going on in the hospital, but now it's like the score of like a straight-to-video teen comedy. I don't know what all this... I don't know, but if that's not confusing enough, it's the whole, and it just keeps changing. This movie feels like, it doesn't feel like a movie, it feels like a hallucination brought about by watching too many Cage movies. And that's the problem, though, is what I'm saying, is like, it's almost like the movie surrenders to him, when what usually makes it fun is that it's like, the movies seem to try to, like, go around him, with him doing his thing, but instead the movie's trying to basically become his insanity and be one big product, but that doesn't, it's just really not working the same way at all. And because it doesn't necessarily always feel like it's intentional. Like, the first part of it, and I'm talking about with the scores and stuff like that, it just feels like a really fucking bad movie and really poorly put together. It's only as it goes on that it tries to embrace some sort of crazy side. There's a point in time when Cage is banging one of them. I lost track of which one. And he's like, I'm gonna read poetry while we fuck or something. And the book that he's reading, I swear to God, is a blue book that's cover just has words on it that say Memories by Nicolas Cage. So he's supposedly reading this poetry book that was written by Nicolas Cage. Sort of like the way he called himself out in Army of One by name also. Where he's getting like way, way, way into the self-awareness. But that's the thing, is you get too far into the self-awareness, you start to kind of take the fun out of it. And it's like, I defend his remake of The Wicker Man. Because I say, if you look at that director's body of work, and what Cage is doing in it, there is no way that is not an intentional comedy. There is just no... you cannot say that movie is a bad horror movie, because it's neither of those things. It is a hysterical comedy, and you can tell they fucking meant it. Look at Neil LaBute's other movies, for fuck's sake. And with this, number one, you don't have that to go on, because this director hasn't really done anything else to base it on. That's why it's almost like they just sort of adopted whatever Cage was doing in mid-production. And even that sounds like it should be the way to go, but apparently it's not, because it just really comes off poorly made, whether that was intentional or not. It doesn't work either way. So either it's trying too hard, or it's just, or not, I guess, I don't know. But, yeah, but I mean, still, if it had been just a regular garden variety movie around this Cage performance, I feel like we'd have more to talk about, but... no, it almost dampens it that it tries to be as crazy as what he's bringing, so that's kind of a bust, unfortunately, but I will always be coming back to Nicolas Cage movies to see whatever the hell he's doing now, so there is that. So now we'll go on to The Kid, which is something I kind of am interested in. It is a Western that is directed by Vincent D'Onofrio, and he's there for like a brief second. And it's a Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid movie starring Ethan Hawke and Dane DeHaan in those roles. And it's also got a side story going on with a kid who kills his dad, who was killing his mother. So now he and his sister are orphaned, and there's a vengeance that wants to be brought on them by Chris Pratt, who is his uncle and was his dad's brother, who wants vengeance on these kids for killing his brother because he's fucking insane. And so they have to run, and eventually they run into the Pat Garrett Billy the Kid situation. And so there's an interesting thing here. The first thing, first of all, though, is obviously there's a shitload of movies on this topic out there. And first and foremost, if you're going to be making a Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid movie, you're always going to be in the shadow of Peg and Paul, regardless. Regardless of what style you take on. To me, personally, I think that's kind of the end-all, be-all of that story on screen. But there is the whole interesting thing about how the title has a double meaning. Because you've got Billy the Kid, obviously, but you've also got this kid, whose name I kept forgetting, so I just kept calling him the Kid, and then that's when it occurred to me, it's like, oh, the title, double meaning, I get it. And there is, like, an interesting sort of thing here, where it's like, where it doesn't take a side, necessarily, like, it doesn't build up that Pat Garrett's some hero and Billy the Kid's some villain, or the other way around. They just kind of exist as their own characters, but at the same time that's also blatantly setting up this whole thing with the kid, like the young kid, who is stuck between them, and it's sort of this moral dilemma of, because the whole thing was, is he going to turn into the crazy people that his dad and his uncle are, or is he going to find his own path? And so it's like, Garrett and Billy the Kid are the representations of those paths. Is he going to become a Garrett? Is he going to become a Billy the Kid? Is he going to go the good, lawful way? Is he going to go the outlaw way? We don't know. Because apparently this kid his mind is very susceptible to his environment, and there's apparently no way he'll be his own individual person, so it's going to be, he's either going to be this, or he's going to be this, or he's going to be that. But hopefully not that. So, as that goes on, there's a certain quality here to just this story alone that could really work. But the story is just kind of told. I'm really rooting for D'Onofrio as a director, but there's just sort of a blandness to the movie itself, to where not a whole lot of it sticks out. The characters don't particularly stick out. The settings are pretty average. The whole beginning feels really fuzzy and confused with the way it's sort of. It's like it's trying to shy away from what's going to be setting this whole thing off, the way it's what we see and what we don't in regards to what's going on here. And I was really confused exactly which characters were which and how they were related to each other and what the hell was going on. All I knew, it was kind of jarring to see that Chris Pratt was going to be basically our main villain. Playing this character that is pretty despicable in the long run, and he does have a couple of scenes where it's like, it's interesting to see him play crazy and evil. It doesn't necessarily just feel like, hey, wouldn't it be different if he did this? Because it's obviously a reunion between D'Onofrio, Pratt, and Hawke, who all were in this same setting in the Magnificent Seven remake. And if I remember correctly, Pratt's character in that was kind of a psycho too, even if he was part of the gang, but still. So there is interesting stuff here, but the thing you'll notice is, bringing on this whole plot and the whole Chris Pratt thing, was that this is a movie that should probably have a lot of tension in it, because it's got the Western setting, we've got a lot of bad guys, there's a showdown that we know is imminent at some point, two even, but there's not really a lot of that at all. It's mostly Billy the Kid fucking around, Pat Garrett chasing him, and occasionally they bring up again that Chris Pratt is looking for them, but Pratt is like so few and far between in the movie, we kind of keep forgetting about him, so when it finally comes to like the end and he's like the main villain and it's like the main showdown, by that point the whole Billy the Kid thing feels pretty much irrelevant, where it's like I guess you could say it was building on like the kid's growth, or there's a good line from Ethan Hawke where he's confronting Chris Pratt and he's saying like, I just dealt with Billy the Kid, killing you's gonna be easy, so stuff like that. But for the most part, while there is something there, I was really just kind of bored with it most of the time, and even when it was kind of getting to those final showdowns, it was like, it still felt like there should have been more tension and probably more build up, but like the characters are so vague in a lot of senses that it's just kind of once again another kind of on the surface thing. Which sucks because I really wanted to like this a lot, and I can see parts of the movie that make me the movie that I thought I was really gonna like that would have been in here is in there, just like every now and then. But for the most part, it's just sort of like I said, it just kind of has that blandness to it, which sucks because obviously this cast is really willing, and the kid playing the kid is good too for it being his first movie. But yeah, so that's basically all that is. The next one is going to be Run the Race. I wasn't sure exactly what this was, but I saw that it went to a lot of it didn't come to this theater specifically, but it was in a lot of theaters in this vicinity. And I wasn't quite sure what it was. By the poster, it appeared to be a football movie, yet it's called Run the Race. Which is, yeah, like an hour into the movie or so, suddenly track is what the thing is. But it is also one of those cases where I was watching it, and then it suddenly occurred to me how it was in so many theaters, despite the fact that there's hardly any names in it that are on the poster, with the exception of a few, but we'll get to those. But, yeah, it's another religious movie. Another faith-based movie. It's like when you're watching a movie and you're like, oh, this is, average, and it's like, how did this get so much attention? And then when they start, bringing the whole faith thing into it, you're like, I get it now. And it's like, oh god, what are they going to do? Is it going to be one of those, oh, it's not too bad? Like, is it going to be like an, what's his name, Alex Kendrick made stuff like Facing the Giants and stuff like that? If it's going to be something like that, it's like, oh, okay, maybe. There might be something here. It's not going to be like God's Not Dead levels or anything like that. But still, there is that worry. And then it more or less ends up being more of a cliche sports movie than anything else. The faith-based thing does come in and does actually provide conflict later, but we'll get to that also. But it is one of those cases where this is the kid that has everything in front of him. He's got all the potential, all the scouts. He's got the attention now. There's a good chance that he's going to do something with this football career. And then, of course, he enters himself, and he can't play now. So his little brother is going to maybe take the stand with this whole track thing, but then will something go wrong with that too? And it's like there's always something looming over this, all the melodrama. You guessed it, they have an alcoholic dad that's potentially dangerous. They have a mom that's no longer with us. All that stuff. And then, of course, as it's going on, there was something so damn cliche about this movie, even though nothing was letting on yet. I was just thinking, one of these guys is going to die. I just feel it. I feel it in my bones. I feel it in my heart. One of these guys will die. And honest to God, as if on cue, the little brother starts convulsing. I know that's not funny, but in the context of this movie, number one, just being a manipulative piece of shit regardless, there is that, but also, just that you just know there had to be a problem. It's a very Nicholas Sparks-esque, where it's like, you're going, and it's like, oh, nothing could go wrong, and then just boom, this character's gonna die out of fucking nowhere. It's like, we've never mentioned this before, but then here it is. So that becomes a continuous thing. There's even one point when he convulses, and it cuts to a black screen. Almost like a TV movie cutting to a commercial break, is what it felt like, given the quality of the rest of the movie. So, there's that. And then there's the whole thing where, like I said, the conflicts if the conflicts aren't cliched, they're convoluted. There's this whole thing where he continuously hits on this nurse, that looking at her is miraculously single, but then we kind of learn why as it goes on. The movie obviously doesn't say that, but I just have a feeling. So it's one of those things where he just keeps running into her, and he's like, you're gonna date me one of these days, and she's like, I don't do that, and back and forth, and suddenly they're dating, just one cut later. And then there's one particular scene, it's like how I talked about in Breakthrough, when they sort of called out, and it's like, hey, maybe it's good for you to have faith, but you just have to know how far it goes, and you have to be responsible. So there's this scene where he meets her parents, and I think that's Rob Moran from the Farrelly Brothers movies is her dad, and he's like, do you believe in God? And he's like, well, and then he talks about how he's like kind of on the fence, and his faith sort of at this sort of thing, where most people stand. myself included. And then the dad's just like, hey man, we've been there, you're not the only one at this table that's, had faith issues. And it's like, oh, that's cool. Her parents are pretty cool. Alright, okay, so this is great. This will be a nice, healthy relationship. Cut to them outside the house after this date's over, after meeting her parents is over, and she's throwing a hissy fit because he's not a full-on, total and complete Jesus freak. And that's the conflict. It's like, great, you almost had a good scene. way to go. Way to keep your movie in check and its shittiness. So yes, and then, you've got all the sports scenes and intercut with all this. All, like, set to Christian rock and the whole Pure Flix-esque soundtrack. I was talking about there are some famous faces here, as these movies often have for some reason. Michael T. Williamson is the coach, the football coach, who's like, does have to give a really genuine performance, one better than this movie. Frances Fisher is there as their godmother, who's like really good. I've always loved Frances Fisher, and she's kind of the perfect choice for that whole sort of like, the one kind of figure in their life that still is where their love comes from. So that's great. Mario Van Peebles is here as like a pastor for some reason. I don't know why the hell it's him of all people, but alright. So, I'm obviously bagging on this movie. It's not as bad as it sounds, and it's not as bad as, a lot of these faith-based movies. But it is very cliche. The characters are very cliche. The conflicts, the plots, all that, very cliche. Then it gets manipulative as shit with oh, by the way, the little brother's dying out of nowhere. Fine. And he's doing that the whole movie, so whatever. And you can see where it's going from a mile away. And so it is what it just is what it is. It's just one of those movies. So let's end on the Mustang. This is a movie I was going to catch at the theater. It was here for a week at this theater, and I missed it because I didn't know it was even here until the very last minute. But I was like, okay, I'll wait for DVD. So it's okay. Matthias Schoenaerts is how I heard his name is said. I heard somebody said his name like that, and he said yes, that's correct. So I will take his word on how his name is said, even though I've heard it like 20 different ways every time somebody says it. This is a very small yet actually kind of beautiful movie, even if once again it's an obvious setup where he is one of those tough prisoners. He's got the shaved head, he's got the sort of, intense eyes and presence. And he's got a very unpredictable personality. He can be very kind of calm and collected the next, like he's very sort of meditative. Then the next, he could be fucking your shit up and be really violent and just have these outbursts. To the point that he's actually pretty much willingly keeping himself in prison because he doesn't trust himself with the way that he is to be out in society. So that in itself says that there's something kind of deep in his character's psyche that you really kind of immediately want to get to understand and get to understand this character better. Even if you see, like, when you don't know if he's going to be calm or if he's going to snap and all that. So he gets involved in this program where the prisoners have to tame these Mustangs, so they're going to be put up for auction, and they have to do it within a certain amount of time, or the horses will be euthanized. And so it's basically the whole relationship between him, and it's like, you've got the beast is taming the beast, but then the other beast is also taming the beast that's taming him. You get that whole thing. It's pretty, I guess it's not exactly doing something new with that whole, finding the gentle side in somebody with this sort of personality and it, being returned in one way or another. But there's just something about this movie. It's really beautifully shot. That's one of the first things you'll notice. And the performances are amazing. He obviously really is the big center of this movie and the big heart of it. And there's some scenes that are also really emotional also. Where no matter how many outbursts he has, you, like, genuinely, like, your heart breaks for him in some certain moments. And the way it goes on, like, the friends he makes friends with, like, Jason Mitchell, and we get to see so many different sides of this character that seems like he's two things on the surface. Like, that's the thing, is you feel like you know the character through and through, and you're like, oh, I see what they're doing here. He's calm and he's reserved on the inside, and he's a real human being, but then on the outside, he's, a brute of sorts. But it goes even deeper than that with this character, which is really great. And Bruce Dern is the guy that's in charge of the horses, who's also really great in this, even with limited screen time. Who's, like, really authoritative. Like, Bruce Dern, at the age that he's at, feels authoritative over this guy. And it's like, that really says something about what he's bringing also. So, Yeah, so you can see that there is, something to that material that might seem like it's, obvious on the surface, but this is one of those cases where it goes beyond what it looks like and beyond, the themes that even if you see the themes immediately right away, it's worth exploring those things. It's worth exploring these characters. It's worth exploring his relationship with the people around him and the horse especially. And this is one of those movies that could have been like almost like really cheesy or almost maybe like overly artsy or something. But it just kind of finds a perfect middle ground where it really sort of gets into your heart, but doesn't feel manipulative, doesn't feel like it's overbearing in any way. It's really sort of calm in the way that it hits you suddenly, much like the character himself. So yeah, obviously this was really short and brief, but that's like the one movie I probably recommend the most on this video. I spend the least amount of time on, but that is movie number 20, which means we are finally done with this. So, yes, thank God. So as you know, the next video is going to be The Lion King and Crawl, and I figure when I see Crawl, I'll probably see Stuber while I'm at it, so just to clear everything up, so I don't have to do another video like this anytime soon. And then the week after that is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, my most anticipated movie of the last 4 years. So, I very much look forward to that. A couple more verses. We're going to end Big Little Lies. Going to do all that stuff. But in the meantime, I am so fucking tired of talking, so I'm going to end this